الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المنتجبين. صلى الله وسلم عليك يا رسول الله، صلى الله وسلم عليك يا أبا عبد الله، يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. يا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز فوزا عظيما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بلى من أسلم وجهه لله وهو محسن فله أجره عند ربه ولا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وصلوا على محمد وآل محمد. One of the perennial and existential challenges that has faced humanity throughout the ages is the question of theodicy, and that is the question of why evil exists in this world. And more particularly, why do bad things happen to good people? If you think about bad things happening to bad people, we justify sometimes in our mind. You see someone who's annoying and they trip over something and you say, well, he deserved it or she deserved it. But why do bad things happen to good people, people who are innocent, pure, who have not hurt anyone? And this is a question that in order for religion to stay relevant throughout the ages must be asked. So when you look at the three major Abrahamic faiths, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Within Christianity, there were a number of philosophers and theologians who tackled this question, such as St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. In Jewish theology, it was mainly Maimonides, and of course, in the Islamic tradition, there were many scholars who tackled this question. And the common thread in that question, the common theme that appears in the answer to that question of why evil exists, all scholars and theologians and philosophers agree that human beings have free will. Human beings are not robots. And it's interesting because the question of God's quote-unquote behavior becomes a question of human being behavior. And these questions normally come up when something really bad happens, such as a natural disaster or genocide. People begin to ask the question, how, if God is omnipotent, meaning that he has power over everything, and if he is omnibenevolent, meaning that he is all good and all benevolent, how is it that something like this can happen? In the history of the Shi'i school of thought, one of the earliest scholars to answer this question was Shaykh al-Saduq, particularly in response to the question of how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would allow something like the tragedy of Ashura to happen. Think about it. This is not a random group of people. I mean, even if it was a random group of people, it would still be a tragedy. We watch movies today produced by Hollywood or a TV series that are completely fictional, that have nothing to do with the truth. But you're able to emotionally connect with the characters on stage. So if you see loss of life, you're able to weep because it tells you of human nature, even if you're not personally connected to this person. So it wasn't a random group of people, but rather it was the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the purest household. So the early communities, they struggled with this question of how could something so great happen to people that were so pure? And so among the early scholars to answer this question was a Shaykh al-Saduq, who passed away in the year 381 after Hijrah. And he wrote a number of books, but in one of his books, I'tiqadat al-Imamiyya, in which he describes the creed and the theology of the Ahlul Bayt school of thought, in his response, he delineates between God's will and God's desire. Everything in this world happens because God wills it to happen. It is out of His will, His mashi'a in the Arabic language. When we say MashaAllah, literally the phrase MashaAllah means what God wills. Because everything which is magnificent, normally if you see something magnificent, you say MashaAllah. In a way you're saying this is out of the will of God. As great as it is, you're reminded of the Khaliq, of the creator that created it. Meaning that God who willed it is greater than this thing that you are in awe about. So he says there were two things. There's the will of God, and everything happens for the will of God. Good, bad, ugly, nice, not nice. Everything out of the will of God. However, God does not desire. Desire is something else. God does not desire for everything to take place in this fashion. And God speaks about His desire in the Quran. The things that He desires to see and the things that He does not desire to see. For instance, what does God desire? He says, for instance, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ التَّوَّابِينَ وَيُحِبُّ الْمُتَطَهِّرِينَ. God desires and He loves when He sees people who are repentant and people who purify themselves. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ. There are instances, things that God does not like to see. It happens out of His will. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ كُلَّ مُخْتَالٍ فَخُورٍ. For instance, people who are deceitful and people who walk around with pride. God does not desire for that to happen. He does not like it when that happens. But it's out of His will. Because this human being is not a robot. This human being also has free will. So the answer that Shaykh al-Saduq provides is that even though it was something that was so abhorrent, something that was so tragic, it was not something that God desired for it to happen. But it happened through His will. And so an even deeper question behind that is that how low does humanity have to get to? How low of a level does humanity have to get to for something like this to happen? For them to be on the other side? Or for people to stay quiet? Because what was equally as tragic as the people who fought against Imam Hussain were the people who stayed quiet. The people who went to bed that night. They heard about the news and they went to bed and they had restful sleep. So in actuality, it was something that happened that had long-term effects and it had short-term effects. The short-term effects, if you read history, you would find that there were a number of people who, within the next 10 to 20 years after what happened to Imam Hussain and his family, they rose up. And the Banu Umayyah, although they ruled, their entire period of rule was about 80 years. So although they ruled for a few decades after the massacre of Karbala, it was not peaceful for them ever. Never was it peaceful for them. There was a series of rebellions and revolutions. One of the first of those rebellions was that was known as Thawratul Tawwabin, the penitents. And these were a number of people who had initially invited Imam Hussain to be with them, to be their leader in Kufa, but then they sold him out. when he agreed, and they turned away, and they let him down. And after they heard about his death, it shook their conscience. So they created an uprising. And it was not a successful uprising. That was short term. Long term is that the massacre that happened became a focal point where the entire religion of Islam became preserved so that you and I can practice the faith and understand the faith in the way that it was sent down to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of the writers, historians, he says, one of the predicaments is that we don't truly understand the magnitude of what Imam Hussain did precisely because his revolution was successful. We would be able to see, if he did not rise up, we would be able to see how different the situation was. And what he was saying was that Islam was on the verge of becoming an Arab monarchy. It was on the verge of becoming an Arab monarchy. And we have present-day Arab monarchies. So we know how terrible the situation could have been. So take the model of the Arab monarchies that we have today, that would have been the entire Islam. If you know what I mean and you can read between the lines. So the question then goes back to what is submission and what is surrenderance? Because it all happens out of the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Quran tells us the following. بَلَى مَنْ أَسْلَمَ وَجْهَهُ لِلَّهِ وَهُوَ مُحْسِنٌ. Verily, the one who submits his face to Allah, and he is muhsin, and he is benevolent, فَلَهُ أَجْرُهُ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِ وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ. So what does it mean to submit your face to God? Well, first of all, according to some commentators, they say that here, in this specific verse, to submit, aslam, to submit means to be sincere. To be sincere in your affairs, the way that you carry yourself. And the face is the holiest part of the body. It's the most honored part of the body. Part of that is the forehead, where we place on the ground in prostration to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you receive someone, a loved one, a relative, and you greet them, you kiss them on their face, on their cheek, on their forehead. It's the most honored place. And we're mandated to take care of our face because our face represents our physical appearance. It's the first line of our appearance. And that's why laws of hygiene, there's an insistence in that area, the laws of hygiene, taking care of yourself, taking care of your face and being presentable before you leave the home. What does it mean to submit? In essence, submission is the opposition of rebellion. And we're told that the first person or the first being to rebel against the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was whom? Iblis. When the angels and the jinn were ordered to submit, to prostrate to Adam, and all of them prostrated except for Iblis. And his reasoning was that he saw himself as superior. And that's why he did not submit. But rebellion, the act of rebellion, in and of itself is not something evil. It's not deplorable. We must first understand principles and define our values by principles to understand whether rebellion is good rebellion or whether it's bad rebellion. Not all rebellion is bad. Why? Because Imam Hussain alayhi salam, he rebelled. Was it not an act of rebellion? It was an act of rebellion. But because Imam Hussain alayhi salam had the proper values which were derived from principles, his rebellion was a good rebellion. His revolution was a good revolution. It was virtuous. It was benevolent. So, in order to understand the nature of the act of rebellion, we must first understand and follow principles, not follow people. The people who were confused at that time, they didn't know what side to take. The reason they were confused is because they didn't stand on principle. They did not follow principle. They followed people. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam, during one of his battles, before the battle of Jamal specifically, he is confronted by one of the companions, and most of you know the story. And one of the companions, he looks to him and he sees Fulan and Fulan on the other side of the battlefield. People that were companions of the Prophet. And he turns to Amir al-Mu'mineen and he confronts him about this fact. He says, how is it that we're about to go into war when I recognize this person and that person and they were with the Prophet and so on and so forth. And in a very short version, Imam Ali alayhi salam clarifies the confusion. And he tells him, he says, you look confused here. إِنَّكَ لَمَلْبُوسٌ عَلَيْكَ. You look very confused here. And then he tells him, اعرف الحق تعرف أهله واعرف الباطل تعرف أهله. When you understand the principle of goodness and virtue, then you will know who is good and who is virtuous. And when you understand evil as a value, then you will be able to recognize who is evil and what is evil. Meaning that don't follow a person just because of a name, or just because of a lineage, or just because of a family. Test their behavior. And does their behavior, is it in alignment with the values that they claim to have? Is it based on the principles which they claim to support? In one narration, Imam Ali alayhi salam, he tells his companions not to fall victim to false prestige. One narration says that one day Amir al-Mu'mineen, while he was Amir, he was on his horse, he was riding his horse, and he saw a number of people following him, a number of followers. So he turned to them. He said, do you have any business with me? Is this why you're following me? They said, no, we just want to, we want to follow you. You're our leader. We want to bask in your glory. He told them, turn back. He says, if you have no business from me, turn back. Because your act of following me now is harmful for you, because it's disgrace for you to follow someone for no reason. And it's also harmful for the person who is riding as well, because it gives the person who is riding a false sense of prestige, that people are following me because I'm somehow special. He said, if you don't have any real business with me, turn away, go back. The reason I mention this, submission, I think because as a community, humanity, psychologically, there's, especially in a world of radical individualism, and I'll talk about this in one of the nights, we're promoted in today's day and age that the world is about you. We live in the age of the influencer, that anybody can really rise to the top. And so this idea of having to submit or to surrender, which this concept is built into the name of our faith, the religion of Islam is surrenderance, it irks people and it rubs people off the wrong way. And one reason specifically, if you look at contemporary society, is because of the fact that a lot of people have been let down by certain political institutions, by certain religious institutions. So when you talk about submission, and when you talk about coming under submission, that irks people and it rubs them off the wrong way. But submission is part of who we are, as long as it is to principles and not people. We follow people as long as we follow principles. There's a writer by the name of Alan Lloyd McGuinness, and he wrote a really important book. Some of you are probably familiar with this book, Bringing Out the Best in People. And he said that whenever you're dealing with a group of people, always consider that there might be temporary insanity. What is insanity? Insanity is when someone loses their mind. Always consider that whoever you're dealing with, they might go insane temporarily. Because sometimes we tend to idolize people and we fall at their feet. And, they become the alpha and the omega for us. And our entire life revolves around people, but then that person we don't realize is not infallible. What if that person loses their mind one day? And unfortunately, when we follow, that tends to happen a lot, especially with celebrities in this day and age, where people idolize them for what they stand for, and then all of a sudden, the celebrity or the person that's being followed, the idol, does something wrong, and they fall from grace, or they commit suicide. And millions of people, millions of followers are affected because they idolize this person, because they saw them as perfect. So submission is not submission to people. Submission is submission to principles. We submit to people as long as they follow principles. This is point number one. Point number two is that submission is not the absence of opinion, but rather the absence of rebellion. And as Muslims, we are not asked for uniformity. We are asked for unity. You know, being able to create harmony between people is truly an art and not a science. There's a lot of books on leadership, management, how to get things done. But in reality, if you think about it, if you've ever been in a leadership position, even within your own home, try to get two people to harmonize and synchronize and work together on a project. And you would know exactly how tough this is. If you've worked in masjid leadership, then you know exactly what I'm talking about. Having people work together in harmony. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the believers in the Quran, He says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَاذْكُرُوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَيْكُمْ. Remember the blessing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala conferred upon you. إِذْ كُنْتُمْ أَعْدَاءَ فَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِكُمْ. That you were once enemies of one another, but God created harmony. God created love and compassion and cooperation between you. And there was a time before the Islamic period where people were enemies of one another. Family members were enemies. They became enemies of one another. And the mission of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was to create unity and harmony. But the way that happened was through submission to the correct principles and to the correct foundations. If you look at history, history gives us a number of examples, but if you look at the history of the 20th century, one of the most successful people, one of the most successful leaders in the 20th century was Mahatma Gandhi, probably the most influential person of his time. And if you look at him in terms of his public appearance, he was an eccentric dude. He didn't wear any formal clothing. You know, he wore his robes, his traditional clothing, and he kind of behaved in sort of a bizarre way if you read about his personal life. But a man like that was able to rattle the foundations of the mighty British Empire. And how was he able to do that? One word: harmony. He was able to bring together people in harmony. Specifically 200 million people. To bring them together in harmony for a chief purpose. And that was the purpose of resistance. And if you don't think 200 million people bringing together is impressive, then go back to that question of trying to bring two people together and see how far you're able to get. So, being able to conduct your manners in a state of harmony. And that begins with yourself. Some of us, we're not at peace with ourselves. We constantly struggle with our past self, with our past mistakes. And we believe that all of the wrong things that we have done, all of the mistakes that we've done in this world have defined who we are. And it's a label. And as long as and when that label gets stuck onto you, you're doomed. And there's no change. So people are not even at harmony with their own selves. So harmony begins with ourself. When we're able to submit to ourself. And then it begins with our family, and then with our community, and then with the globe. So this is point number 2. Point number 3 is submission when it comes to responding to our personal challenges and the challenges of others. Because that is the true test of submission. And if you study the life of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, what does Imam Hussain teach us? His statement on the day of Ashura was Ilahi ridan biqada'ik wa tasliman li amrik. That, oh Allah, I am satisfied, I am content with what you have decreed. And I have submitted myself to your will. If this is your will, then I am content. So there's 2 aspects when it comes to personal challenges. Number 1 is helping people navigate through their personal challenges, and then us navigating through our own personal challenges. So I just want to make a quick point here when it comes to helping people navigate through their challenges. Most people in this world are very well-intentioned. Would you agree? I mean, there's very little people who have evil intentions. And a lot of the damage that comes in this world comes from people who are well-intentioned but ignorant. And most of the time when it comes to helping people navigate through their challenges, we are well-intentioned but we're ignorant. I'll give you an example. The first example is the language that we use with other people to help them navigate through their challenges. In our mind, when we come across someone who's facing a challenge, such as a financial loss, or a health challenge, or the loss of a loved one, or the loss of a career, or a divorce, we tend to use language that is well-intentioned but ignorant of the person's state. So what do we tend to tell people? Don't worry, you'll get over it. You're a very strong person. That person is in a better place. What other language do we use? Sometimes I've even heard, it wasn't meant to be. And the reason I say this is well-intentioned is because we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a will. Our lens by which we see this tragedy is this is the will of God. But the way that we portray that and the way that we convey that, it's well-intentioned, but it's ignorant. Some people even, I've heard when someone loses a child, when there's a stillborn, when a child is born but not alive, they say things like, well, it's good that the child didn't grow up because you would have been attached to the child and that would have been worse. As if attachment is based on a child reaching a certain age. Once a child gets to age 5 or 6 or 7, you become attached. And they don't understand that sometimes having a child, you become attached to the child 10 years before the child is born because you're thinking about your children in the future. So sometimes we need to equip ourselves with the right type of language. Instead of telling people that they'll get over it, asking them what this tragedy means to them. Telling them that for as long as they are hurting, you will be there with them. I'm here with you. I will be here with you. I don't understand your pain, but I'm here to listen to you if you want to explain to me. In this way, it becomes much, much more beneficial. So number 1, helping people navigate through their challenges, and then navigating through our own challenges. And the reality is, my friends, we may never understand the whys of life because the picture is much, much bigger than we are. But I will share with you something. The famous psychoanalyst Viktor Frankl, he says that suffering ceases to be suffering once we create meaning out of it. What does that mean? Once we understand that there's a meaning or a purpose behind an event in which we suffer from, it ceases to be suffering. Once we have a clear picture of it. And that's why when you study the case of Imam Hussain alayhi salam, when you study the case of all of the great prophets and the imams, They suffered. Physically, they suffered. Absolutely. 100%. There's no doubt in that. But spiritually, they were content in their spirit. Why? Because it had meaning. It had purpose. They knew and they could see the result of what was happening to them, as if it was right in front of them. I'll narrate to you a personal anecdote and I'll end with this. There was a lady who lives in Southern California. And a while ago, one of her sons had passed away. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in a car accident. Once he passed away, something happened in her life that she changed her life around completely. She was far away from the religion. She was not practicing. She did not care for Hajj or Umrah or Ziyarah or anything like that. But once her son passed away, she turned around 180 degrees. She began to frequently go to Ziyarah. She began to frequently perform the Hajj. She started to observe the full hijab. She started to pray every single day on time. And then one day, this is out of a personal narration, one day she saw her son in her dream. And her son said to her, he said, "Mom, the reason why I died is that so you can change your life." All of a sudden, she had meaning in her life. Now, did that make things better for her in terms of grief? I don't know. But all of a sudden it had meaning. All of a sudden it had a purpose. She realized that there was a reason why this happened. It was not in vain. It was not abath. It didn't happen because God was just angry at her and God wanted to punish her. Many of us, we think bad things happen to us because God is just angry at us and He wants to punish us. And that's very, very limited vision. Imam Hussain alayhi salam, we learn from his example. Someone who continuously was able to see the result of what was happening. And that's why confidently Imam Hussain could say, "Ilahi ridan biqada'ik wa tasliman li amrik." He could say that with power. He could say that with confidence. Because he knew exactly what was to happen on the other side. And now I want to take your hearts to Imam Hussain alayhi salam in Karbala. After Imam Hussain left Medina, the next best place for him to go to was the city of Mecca. And he arrived long before the Hajj season, but he stayed until the Hajj season so that he can perform the Hajj. But it was not long until even Mecca, a place of security and a place of sanctity, also became a threat on his life. And the Prophet Ibrahim, the Quran narrates the story of the Prophet Ibrahim thousands of years before, that he had spoken a supplication, a dua. وَإِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ رَبِّ اجْعَلْ هَذَا الْبَلَدَ آمِنًا. O Allah, make this place, this balad, Mecca, speaking of Mecca, make it a place of safety. Make it a place of security. Make it so that people can come here as a place of refuge and that they would be safe. They would be protected. And that's why even the animals, even the insects, even the plants that don't have life, human life, are protected in the city of Mecca, in the sanctuary of Mecca. It is not permissible for anyone to hunt or to shed blood in the city of Mecca. Not even to pull a plant out of its place. And Imam Hussain alayhi salam honored this idea. But because Yazid ibn Muawiyah was so adamant about securing the allegiance of Imam Hussain, he was willing to go at great lengths. So he sent assassins to the city of Mecca, even though Mecca was a sanctuary. But Yazid did not care for that. And when Imam Hussain alayhi salam realized this, that his life was in danger, he took the moral high ground. He did not want Mecca to be a place where his blood was going to be shed. And so before he could even complete the Hajj, Imam Hussain came out from the state of Ihram. He delivered his famous sermon, خط الموت على ولد آدم مخط القلادة على جيد الفتاة وما أولهني إلى أسلافي اشتياق يعقوب إلى يوسف. He speaks of death and the inevitability of death and how nobody can escape death and how he longs. He says, I long to be with my predecessors. I long to be with Rasulullah. I long to be with my parents. I long to be with my brother Al-Hassan, in the same way that Yaqub was longing for his son Yusuf. When Yusuf was stripped away from him, thrown into the darkness of a well, sold into slavery, put into prison, all the while Yaqub had no idea. And he wept and wept and wept. And the Quran says, فَبْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْحُزْنِ فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ, that he almost lost his eyesight because he wept. In that same way, Imam Hussain says, that same way that Yaqub was longing for his son Yusuf, I am longing to meet my predecessors. And it's at that time, brothers and sisters, that Imam Hussain alayhi salam knew that death was imminent, that it was impending, that it was inevitable, that no matter where he went, whether he went back to Medina, whether he went east, west, no matter where he would go, that Yazid was relentless in his mission. And so that was when he decided to take and begin his journey from Mecca all the way to Karbala, which took about 23 days. And inshallah, in the coming nights, we will give more details about the journey of Imam Hussain alayhi salam. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless us in this holy month. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات. تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات. إنك مجيب الدعوات. إنك قاضي الحاجات. إنك على كل شيء قدير. برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى الله وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.